we frequently talk about cannabis being safe or not safe or things like that. So I found an article that I'd like to take a look at. It's called Fact Check: How Dangerous is Cannabis? 4 Myths Exposed. So let's
Dun,
take a
dun,
look at that one.
dun.
We've talked about this before, but I like this article because it showed a little bit better both sides. We're always very
Mhm.
pro cannabis, and a lot of people are negative. Well, this kind of splits it down the middle and says, okay, here's the myth, and this is what we found out. So Germany might be the next country to legalize cannabis, but the drug is still shrouded in misinformation. DW's fact-checking team examines 4 myths surrounding cannabis and whether or not it should be legal. Should cannabis be legal? Several governments, such as those as Canada and Southern Africa, and several U.S. state governments have green-lighted recreational cannabis use in recent years. And
Yes, very, very cool, man. The dominoes are definitely falling. It's getting there.
yeah. Now, Germany's Bundesrat is set to vote on new cannabis laws. If it passes, which is almost assured considering that representatives from all 3 government parties are in favor of it, the growth of the consumption of limited amounts of the drug will become legal for adults as of April 1st. Still, in many parts of the world, possession and consumption of cannabis is prohibited and often severely punished. For years, discourse, both online and off, surrounding cannabis legalization has been steeped in falsehoods and claims that, when placed under scrutiny, can't be proven. DW's fact-check team took a look at the research and spoke with experts to clarify some of the most popular myths. Okay, we've all heard this one. Cannabis is a gateway drug.
Yes,
Anybody
heard that.
Yeah, we all have.
Every drug assembly I went to in high school was just like, if you do cannabis, next thing you know, you'll be shooting heroin in an alleyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cannabis is a gateway drug, according to, for example, German politician Markus Söder. The DW fact check says it is unproven. The theory that using cannabis leads to the use of harder and often more dangerous drugs is probably one of the most common cases made against the legalization, as well as one of the oldest. Söder and his colleagues used the argument in an interview with the German tabloid Bild in April 2023, accusing opposition parties of trivializing the drug. Tongue twisters today, man. On social media, supporters of legalization have generally opposed the claim. Fact, there is a correlation between cannabis and the later use of harder narcotics, studies have shown. The earlier and more frequently people use cannabis, the higher the likelihood of later use of other illicit drugs. But correlation is not causation. If you look at it, how someone became a heroin user, you are likely to find that cannabis was used along the way, says Dr. Stefan Tones, head of the forensic toxicology at Frankfurt University Hospital. But if you look at it the other way around, how many cannabis users go on to use heroin afterwards? It's very, very few. And this shows that correlation alone is not proof of causal relationship. I like to see when they do that, this is where I think it makes a lot of sense, because yes, there are points to be made on both sides, but I think this clearly says it that, yes, cannabis users are probably no more likely to become heroin addicts. I like the way they put that. The gateway drug theory cannot be completely disproved, since Eva Hock, says Dr. Eva Hock, a psychologist in the psychiatry department at the University Hospital in Munich. She has been studying the effects of cannabis for about 20 years. Cannabis naturally stimulates the reward center in the brain and could pharmacologically promote drug affinity, she said. But there are also many other risk factors of illicit drugs that need to be considered also, she said. The National Institute...
Just to add there, where it says she has been studying the effects of cannabis for about 20 years. I like that. That's a better way of saying I've been smoking weed for 20 years, but I've been studying the effects of cannabis for about 20 years. Here we go, everybody.
How have you been studying that? Yeah, it's been illegal for 20 years. How you been doing this? So you've got a good point, Mackie. But there are many other risk factors for illicit drugs that need to be considered, she said. The National Institute on Drug Abuse in the U.S. says so, too, adding that more research is needed on the question of cannabis as a gateway drug. For the time being, the claim that cannabis is a gateway drug remains unproven. Okay, we've said it many times before, and a lot of people in the cannabis community honestly believe this. Cannabis is not necessarily a gateway drug. Cannabis dealers who sell other drugs are the gateway.
Mhm.
You know,
And the fact that if you get told for many years that cannabis is dangerous, you're going to end up in the fucking gutter with a syringe in your arm if you use cannabis, And once people try cannabis and be like, hold on, that that wasn't so bad. What else are they lying to me about? And that's how it kind of works. And this is why you become a bit of a conspiracy theorist as well, because you suddenly figure out that the government and all these people have been lying to you all along. This cannabis stuff is actually not dangerous, and definitely not as dangerous as alcohol is. And it's just been stigmatized the way it is.
Ooh, let's take a look at that one then, shall we? Good segue,
Yes.
Mackie.
Yes. I was leading it directly to that on purpose because of my professionalism level.
Here comes the next claim. Okay. Alcohol is over 100 times more dangerous than cannabis, according to the post, like the one, like on one on X, like the one on X. I'm sorry. This is really a bad typo in this one. German translators, I get it. The social media site formerly known as Twitter. DW, the fact is misleading. It is often claimed, especially by those advocating for legalization, that alcohol is far more harmful than cannabis. Several social media posts and news articles mention a study that claims alcohol is 114 times more dangerous than cannabis. Now, how they got 114, that exact number? Who knows? I have no idea. It seems like an awful, weird number to come up with. This claim does not hold up. The figure is nowhere to be found in the cited study, which only shows that the risk of fatal alcohol overdoses is greater than that of a fatal cannabis overdose. Since its effects start shortly after being smoked, the strength of intoxication caused by cannabis can be better compared to alcohol, Tone said. It is thereby reducing the risk of an overdose. However, when cannabis is consumed like on a pastry overseas, edibles, overdoses can occur as well. With that said, the negative effects of both drugs don't start with an overdose, but the study referenced in these posts doesn't address the non-fatal consequences. A different non-intoxicating effects of alcohol and cannabis come with their own dangers. Tone said, adding that it's important to take into account that the effects on the social environment and mental health. Alcohol has a very significant effect, which is disinhibition and increased risk taking. He said this is actually less the case with cannabis, but we have to take into account the unpredictable risk of paranoia and people's effects to cannabis. But basically here, they're saying that alcohol can kill you outright, but weed does have some effects that can also be bad for you. So I'm going to have to agree with that. Cannabis is not without all problems.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I wonder how much of the paranoia is simply down to the fact that cannabis is an illegal substance in most countries. It can definitely cause anxiety, but I think the paranoia comes specifically from it being illegal. If it wasn't illegal and didn't have the stigma it carried, then the paranoia wouldn't be so extreme for some people, I think, in my opinion.
You're right. I think you're right with that. I did notice back in the day when the only thing I was ever able to get was street weed that just came from who knows where. I think the paranoia was higher. I think it was having to do with the way the cannabis was grown. I did notice in legal states when I got cannabis that was produced by good growers and good dispensaries that the paranoia level was lower. But again, is that because I'm smoking in a place where it's legal now?
Yeah.
There are so many questions with this stuff like that, though. Yeah. But we've always maintained that homegrown cannabis that's grown properly has less negative effects on you because of the ripening process, the way it's grown, lots of different factors. I kind of still want to lean toward that. Yeah, you do too, Marge?
I feel like they're downplaying the risks involved in drinking alcohol a little bit, especially the health risks. That's what I see everywhere now is drinking more than a certain amount of alcohol has significant impacts on your health, which you don't. I mean, you do have to be cognizant if you're combusting cannabis, maybe, but generally speaking, it's pretty safe. But you're right. There is nothing without zero risk.
Right.
Exactly. Well, everything in moderation, man.
Yeah.
Sure. Says the negative effects of alcohol consumption on the body have long been proved. Alcohol has a high organ damaging effect and causes more health damage than cannabis, Hawk said. But it also depends on the intensity of the use, not just the substance. So yeah, if you're drinking one beer a month and you're smoking 5 joints a day, guess which one's going to hurt you more?
Life. Life. Drink more beers, smoke more weed. All right.
Well, you got to do a 1-to-1, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's hard to clearly assess the health risks of cannabis because of its various forms. In Europe, for example, cannabis is often smoked with tobacco, which is well known to have harmful carcinogenic effects. This is thus indirectly related to cannabis use. So alcohol overdoses are more likely than cannabis, but both drugs can endanger the physical and mental use of the users and have negative impacts on the environment, even in small quantities. The dangers can hardly be compared with number one, the claim that alcohol is 114 more times dangerous than cannabis, therefore it is misleading. So we believe that, just strictly here on High and Homegrown, we believe that cannabis is safer than alcohol, but we're just saying it can't be proven yet. More information is needed.
And just a quick shout out there to, who was it? Is a Clash Cornolio in the chat. And this has been brought up before. According to French Cannoli, the clear trichomes are more likely to induce paranoia, and premature harvest is more likely in an illegitimate setting. And that's right, man. This is why it's important to make sure that you harvest plants at the right time, because if it's done too early, then it is said that the immature THC can cause anxiety and paranoia. And when you're a home grower and you make sure that that shit's done properly, you're much less likely to experience it. But if you're buying from the street, when that shit looks done, they're chopping it, drying it as quickly as possible and selling it. So,
yep. See, when they're doing it on the street, they're not worried about quality. They just want your money. That's all it is. And they know they got the only game in town. So that's the way it works.
Very true.
But yeah, by all means, grow your own, get the good stuff, cut the
grow your own. Grow, it's so important. Anyway, what we got next? We got the can you die from excessive cannabis use?
Claim. According to this tweet, there has been no recorded death due to cannabis overdose. Okay, the fact check says, yes, this is true. So we've said this many times, and it says it's true. According to NIDA, no single overdose death has occurred so far has been solely attributed to cannabis. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also states that a fatal overdose is unlikely. Despite this, cannabis cannabis use as a cause of death remains under discussion in various scientific studies. In the 1970s, tests were carried out on dogs and monkeys to determine what dose of cannabis could be potentially lethal. The animals were administered a high dose of oral THC, and they showed symptoms such as drowsiness, tremors, and vomiting, but all survived the involuntary high. Animal studies are difficult to transfer to humans, but Hawk said the lethal dose for cannabis is very, very high and very unlikely that a human would ingest that much. Now, we had talked about this before. Back in the 60s, they established the lethal dosage level of cannabis for a human that's somewhere around 1,000 pounds of smoked cannabis. You will die of oxygen deprivation before you smoke 1,000 pounds of cannabis. The bale will kill you before you smoke it. I guarantee it. It's one of those deals. Death not ruled out. Researchers at King's College London have been trying to retrospectively determine whether cannabis can be deadly to humans by reviewing all cannabis-related deaths that occurred in England between 1998 and 2020. In almost all cases, cannabis was not the only drug. On average, 3 to 7 other substances were also detected, such as opiates, alcohol, or drugs such as tranquilizers or sleeping pills. In 4% of the deaths, researchers found cannabis to be the in 4% of the deaths, researchers found cannabis to be the sole cause of death, usually due to injuries sustained during intoxication. In one case, cannabis toxicity could have resulted in a death. I think that's probably they're talking about that infant that ate that entire bottle there. Or not really infant, but the toddler, one of those deals. Still, it remains unclear whether a single dose was a cause of death or the duration and ultimately contributed. Hawk said that there were other published cases of cannabis-related deaths. These have been reported in association with accidents, suicides, or cardiovascular complications such as a heart attack. But establishing the cause of death in these is difficult. Okay, so smoking pot is not good for your heart. NIDA warns that the risks can result from elevated heart rate caused by cannabis use. The Institute has stated that cannabis increases heart rate for up to 3 hours after smoking, which it says may increase the risk of heart attack. Cannabis definitely has an effect on the cardiovascular system. People who are particularly sensitive or have a predisposition or have previous damage may therefore particularly be sensitive to cannabis. Older studies also suggest a link between cannabis use and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. You can't rule out the possibility that this could become a life-threatening situation. All right. Now, getting back into the last bit of it here. The risk of dying from a single cannabis overdose is negligible, King College researchers said. Apart from the huge amounts of cannabis needed, like I said, 1,000 pounds, it's also considered physiologically impossible, unlikely, Hoff says. Very low presence of cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem is why cannabis is not going to be deadly to you, at least in people without pre-existing conditions. It has less effect on breathing and other important bodily functions such as blood pressure or heart rate. Opioid receptors, on the other hand, play a greater role in the brainstem, which is why heroin overdoses can lead to respiratory failure. Alcohol can also have a paralyzing effect on the central nervous system, especially the respiratory center, and therefore can also lead to death. So yeah, here we go. Can't prove that cannabis can kill you, but they do know that opioids and alcohol will kill you. Well, not will, but can kill you.
You can have those. You can, man, I went to see my friend today. Random tangent.
Go
Went
ahead.
to see my friend today, and he likes to grow lots of different kinds of exotic plants and cacti. And he had this one plant which he saved from his friend, which is poisonous. It's like actually known to be a poisonous plant. You take them leaves off and put them in somebody's tea, and you're killing them. But he's allowed to have that plant. But I am not allowed to have a harmless, like actually fucking harmless cannabis plant.
So this guy could be out there making houseplant tea and killing all his enemies.
Yeah.
And no one would be the wiser.
Completely legal. He's allowed to have that plant. What the? You couldn't make it up, could you?
No. I mean,
No.
there's a lot of plants out there that are in your garden, my garden, everybody's outside garden, probably, even in your house, that are just deadly. You know, it's one of those things that we can have those, but if you eat this cannabis plant, it might make you feel good.
One of the few plants that is not deadly. Can't have that. That's against the rules. Can't have that. It's bad for you. Gives you psychosis. Like, I'm worried more about my liver right now. You know, can I eat them berries there without my liver dissolving? God damn.
Let's go through the last little point on this one. I know it's a long article. It's probably getting pretty boring at this point, but the last one was a little bit interesting. Does cannabis kill brain cells? The thing is, I really never heard this before and never even thought about it. So cannabis doesn't kill brain cells, according to some accounts on Twitter. Unproven. How does cannabis affect the brain? In the 1970s, a psychiatrist, Robert Heath, at Tulane University Medical School in New Orleans, made headlines after conducting an experiment on a rhesus monkey that he said was proved that cannabis use kills brain cells. Now, this is kind of crazy to me because I know in the 70s, everybody was trying to prove cannabis was bad. So and down here in the deep South, this is New Orleans, so that's definitely deep South down here. They try extra hard to make you not use cannabis and try and scare you on it. So I'm not believing too much of what this guy says. Qualitative implementation of the experiment was heavily criticized, and the results of the study were later refuted by researchers at the National Center for Toxicology Research in Arkansas.
As you were saying, Monkey. As you were saying.
To date, studies on the long-term effects of cannabis on brain structure in humans have shown conflicting results. Hawk has long followed the explosion of publications around cannabis. It's true that cannabis interferes with neurophysiology, she said, but she emphasizes that she can't clearly say how neurotoxic or brain damaging the main ingredient in cannabis, THC, really is. She said further research is needed. Now, we've said this many times, guys. Further research is needed everywhere. People just make one statement and all of a sudden becomes the law around here. So it's crazy. You know,
but you're just saying as well, you know, not all cells are good. Maybe it does kill some brain cells, but maybe those cells needed to go. You know what I'm saying, everybody? You know what I'm saying? You don't want them mutated cells staying around. Sorry, Marge?
I don't know if any of you can afford to lose any more brain cells, but
I don't know about
what's that supposed to mean? Jesus! Gee, I've never been so offended in all my life.
Calm down, Mackie. We'll get to that in a minute, Mackie. Don't worry. We'll calm down. We'll get to that point in a minute.
Calm down. No, hold me back, Monkey. Hold me back.
All right. So as far as damaging brain cells, everybody who has used cannabis for a short amount of time understands stoner brain. It happens, right? If you're a little bit high, sometimes you're doing something and your mind drifts and you forget what you were doing. That's stoner brain. It happens. It's almost like a senior moment created by cannabis. So yeah, more is known about intermediate short-term effects. There is a good evidence that certain mental abilities are impaired after acute cannabis use, such as short-term memory, psychomotor coordination, or attention span. With chronic use, these effects can persist for days. However, they appear to be reversible after several weeks of abstinence.
Wow.
Abstinence, not obstinance, abstinence. That was a good one. That was a good one there. But yeah, a tea break usually goes ahead and puts you back on your feet and you're normal again. So they're agreeing with this. Okay, there are young people at risk because they say no, it's no denying that cannabis use can damage the brain of young people in particular, as brains develop significantly during the transition from childhood to adulthood. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns that cannabis use before age 18 can affect how brains build connections for functions such as attention, memory, and learning, but also emphasize that the effects of cannabis use on the brain depends on many factors, such as the amount of THC, how often it is used, the age it first was used, and is it accompanied by other substances such as alcohol and tobacco. I've spent a ton of time on this article, and I'm not going to go any further than that. But it's basically showing you, I like this article because it shows both sides. It doesn't show cannabis as the, the white knight's going to save the world, but it also doesn't show it as a villain that's going to kill the world either. So I feel it was a good balanced thing, but I also thought it was positive enough on cannabis to bring to the show today.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in these echo chambers and think that, that cannabis is harmless. And it is, compared to most things, it is, but it does bring dangers with it as well. And sometimes that needs highlighting,
So yeah, we're not going to tell you to go ahead and use cannabis because it's fun and it's harmless. You need to assess this for yourself. So do your homework before you get involved there.
Consume cannabis responsibly, just like everything else.
By all means, yes. And make up your own mind on this stuff.